Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. We are now into our second week of the podcast. This is episode 4. We had a great first week. I'm very excited. Thank you for all the support, all of the downloads. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you like the content. We're trying to build this plane on the fly and get it up to altitude, and every interaction, every bit of support helps. Little bit of housekeeping to get us started here today. We are now available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. We submitted the podcast and we were approved, and we are available on those platforms for now. So you can find us there. Obviously, we're going to continue to premiere on YouTube at 9 p.m., but also visit us at freepeopleradio.com to find all of the other places that you can access the podcast. We're working on getting the podcast up on Twitch. We're backing it up on BitChute. We're also getting all the episodes and clips available on Rumble, because we know we have a huge Rumble audience that's out there that wants their content on Rumble. So we're trying to provide content in all of the places that our listeners or our future listeners are. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about, well, I don't want to say a little bit. We're going to continue the conversation we had from Friday, but we're going to get a little more granular. We're going to get a little more focused. And with that focus, I want to talk about the difference between globalism and nationalism, and this emerging conflict in today's political world between globalism and nationalism, and not only in today's political situation or political landscape, but historically the fight between globalism and nationalism. So we're going to get into that, and I'm going to show a clip or a few clips or a few bits of reference material for the audience here that can see and also try and get the message through to those who are listening on how to separate the signal from the noise, especially when you're researching certain things. So we're going to get to all that and more today. Today is Monday, February 13th, year of our Lord 2023. Please Call Me Crazy, episode 4. And we're happy to be here. We're happy you're here. And I don't want to, I know that week 1 was a bit chaotic. It was certainly chaotic for us here in the studio and on the team to try and, sort out all of the different logistics and ghost traps and invisible, problems that pop up when you launch a project like this or a company like this. And so we were kind of chaotic last week, and we're honing in on the process, and we're honing in on everything that it takes to run this, this operation. And in that, I was just reflecting back on the last week and how the format of the shows did not really represent how the format will be in an ongoing basis. And I say that because I want you guys to have, all of the listeners out there, to have a format that they can trust, that they can rely on, that has some type of consistency to it, so that we can develop a conversation, but also develop a conversation where you can trust in it in regards to your own life and in regards to your own schedule and things that you have going on. So, last week it was week 1, and I felt that I had to lay out the foundation of my story and right some wrongs that have been, sent out to the masses through the mainstream media, the media industrial complex, the mainstream media and the internet. So I did that on episode 1, and I recanted my entire NBA story for the most part. And I thought that was a good jumping off point for the podcast. And then we had the State of the Union address on Tuesday, which I didn't foresee or really know about, given how busy we were trying to get the podcast ready for launch. So I had to address the State of the Union just because of the pure dishonest political theater spectacle that it was and that it always is. And then on Friday, there was no better place to tie both of those things together, my history coming from within the corporatocracy, and having this big fight with the global corporate community, a farce of a State of a Union address, and one of the most dangerous things that we face today, which is nuclear war and the conflict there between Russia and Ukraine. And so I felt I had to address, or it made sense to address, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, because as far as a State of a Union goes, a State of a Union address, you would think that the potential for nuclear war is the highest priority, or high up on the list of things that should be the focus. and it certainly wasn't. Not in any honest way. So that was kind of week one, but on an ongoing basis, the format of Please Call Me Crazy will be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 p.m. On Mondays, we'll do a deep dive. On Wednesdays, we're going to focus more on news and current events. It'll probably be a little more lighthearted. I want to just take things as they're popping up on the headlines and show people how I interact with things that I see and hear. So you'll get a lot of reactions out of me from that, a lot of different content that's out there, maybe going viral at the time. So on Wednesdays, we'll do more of a current events and news style hour and a half. But I am who I am. Any one topic could end up on in a 20-minute rant. So we'll try and keep to that format on Wednesday. But some of these things really throw me into a rant-like mentality. And then on Fridays, we're going to start doing our Family and Friends Friday, which will premiere a guest, and we'll be doing that this Friday. I guarantee you, win, lose, or draw. We have a bunch of prospects out there for the first Family and Friends episode, the first guest episode. I will be telling you who that guest will be on Friday. On Wednesday, I'm sorry. On Wednesday, I'll tell you who that guest will be for Friday's episode, and we'll proceed like that. Going to try and keep the guest episodes to an hour and a half if possible, but we don't want to shorten or cut off any guests who have a great take or a great story. We want to allow them the opportunity to say everything they need to say, because we're all working on limited time, and we're especially working on limited time when it comes to these platforms and whether or not our material will even stand the test of time. So all of that and more to come. Let's start back where we were on Friday, and I want to give people a little bit of an overview of where we left off on Friday, because week one, right? We're developing a conversation. We're in the infancy of this podcast. And I promise I won't recap previous episodes or previous weeks in the future. I just feel that it's necessary because we are in the infancy stages of this podcast. So while we're building this audience, I want new subscribers and people who may have just found the podcast today to be able to be introduced to where we are in the conversation. So I promise I'll be short. I laid out a few abstract ideas. They were big ideas on Friday. And essentially what they were was this idea of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and that the four horsemen of the apocalypse can be looked at metaphorically and as represented in the prevailing ideologies of today. And I used history to show a progression from one prevailing ideology to the prevailing ideology of today. And those four horsemen, or those prevailing ideologies, were as such: secularism, which came during the Enlightenment, which came in the post-Enlightenment era and gave birth to liberalism, communism, and now globalism. And that kind of takes us from today all the way back to the Enlightenment. And in those four horsemen, you see each one represent the specific horse in the apocalyptic scenario. Secularism representing death, liberalism representing war, communism representing famine, and globalism representing conquest. And those are the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Biblically, you had the death horse, you had the famine horse, or the war horse first, the famine horse, and finally the horse of conquest. And what I did was tie those to these four heresies of the West, or what I call the four heresies of the West. Why? Because the West had a set of heresies that were the applications of such ideologies that really set the stage for where we are today and helped us along that progression. And those four heresies are the scientific method, obviously stemming from secularism, war stemming from liberalism, and we see that very prevalent in the neoliberal, neoconservative war machine, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And famine stemming, not famine, computer technology, and this idea of a social connectivity that stems from communism, and finally, last but not least, artificial intelligence, which is the truest method of globalism, that real worldwide conquest at the grassroots level. And so those were the ideas that I laid out, and those were some pretty big ideas, pretty abstract ideas, but I trust in my audience and my listeners to be able to follow. And I'm not in a rush for you to understand these things, which is why I committed to having a podcast in an ongoing basis and talking to you on a continual basis. So with that being said, please like and subscribe to the channel if you will. But that's not even what it's about. I really would like people to comment, and I really would like people to start to ask questions that we can address, or that I can go back and review and then try and answer some of those questions in future episodes, so we can really start to build a conversation together in a community of thought, as well as spirit and love and all of the other good things that community should have. So those were some pretty abstract ideas, right? But what it brought us to was the war between the Ukraine and Russia. And really, it's a war between Russia and the West. And this war stems back a long time. I mean, Russia's been fighting against Europe and the European monarchies since the Middle Ages. And I use these four frameworks to sort of highlight Vladimir Putin and who he is and what position he is and what position Russia plays culturally, politically as a nation in this sort of four-player jump ball. And this four-player jump ball represents, the free people of the world, citizenship, free people of the world, free people of America, but free people all around the world. Right? It represents citizenship, the value of citizenship, the desire for citizenship. And then you have the globalists, the party of Davos, which really represents the remnant of the European monarchies and the elite and powerful there in Europe. And then you had Russia and China. And Russia and China represent two very ethno-national cultures, two cultures that believe in their people, they believe in their nation, and they almost believe in it to a religious sense. China more than Russia. Russia has more of a national pride, a nationalist MO. But China has a very explicit ethno-national MO. They believe that the Chinese people have the mandate of heaven and that they are the religion. And if you wanted to get more granular, the CCP and certain groups within China believe that the Han Chinese are the chosen people to lead and rule the world. And you see a lot of inter-Chinese racism between people who are Han Chinese and people who aren't. That's represented sort of in the Uyghur genocide. So I say all that, and I recanted a little bit of that so you can catch up, and hopefully you are a little caught up on where we were Friday. But ultimately, the question that comes is globalism or nationalism. That's the question that we arrive at. That's the part of the conversation where we left off, is this idea of globalism, and that Russia, for however you look at Russia on the board right now, does naturally represent a more national dictatorship. China represents a more national dictatorship. The globalists represent an international dictatorship, and we, the free people, we represent this sort of sleep populist, this sort of sleep global citizenship, you could say, for lack of a better phrase, but citizens and nations all around the world who are sort of asleep at the wheel and not privy to these sort of geopolitics. And what it made me think of, and what I wanted to address today first to begin this episode, is the psychology. Let's talk about the psychology of the nationalists versus the globalists. The psychology. Let's talk about the psychological profile of Vladimir Putin, and why I say that Vladimir Putin, although he may be corrupt, he may be a tyrant, he may be a murderer, he's certainly an ex-spy and a spooky character, and he may be any other number of things that you want to ascribe to him. But he navigates corruption, which we all have to navigate. All of us who believe in God, who are Christians, know that we are fallible and that we sin. Nobody is without sin. He who cast the first stone, right? All of us navigate corruption in our life, and the impulse towards corruption, the propensity towards corruption. Vladimir Putin, as a Russian and with a Russian perspective, Russian culture as his backdrop, navigates corruption differently than some others. And so you can look at a person's, you can, if you understand the human condition, if you have a connection, if you're connected and jacked in to the human condition and the way that the human mind works and the way that human action is an effect of the human mind and the human psychology, you can start to lay out, or you can start to see who people are at bottom and at top, and then sometimes everywhere in between. This is what helps us be able to predict behavior. And there is great predictability to behavior, although it's not foolproof. It's it has its fallibility as well. It's not God, but it does have some good utility. And so the human condition is the best way to do that. And when you look at Vladimir Putin, or you look at the nationalist mindset, the nationalist psychology, um, you can see that their navigation of corruption has natural guardrails. It has natural bumpers to it. It has natural limits. It has a floor and it has a ceiling. So when Vladimir Putin gets done navigating all of the corruption there in Russia, all of the inner Russia politics, all of the things that are happening on the world stage and geopolitics internationally, his own individual personal life and anything that may be happening there, when he gets done, when he's resting, when he comes to a pause and looks out at the world and there are no blatant, overt obstacles in front of him, Russia as a nation, Russia as a culture, as a tradition, and as a people are prominent in his psychology. And if you hear him talk, he says that in a pretty forthright way, that Russia must exist. The Russian people must always have a place that they can identify as Russia. And there is an ethno-nationalism to that. And here is the great misinformation or mainstream narrative dishonesty that has taken place around nationalism. The mainstream establishment has used Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo, other fascist leaders in the past to delegitimize nationalism writ large, delegitimize nationalism as a whole. There's nothing more inappropriate or dishonest than that, because what they're essentially doing is saying that the nation state itself, that the nation state as a political phenomenon is inherently illegitimate because of what a few people decided to do under the rubric of a national mindset. And when you really dig down deep into it, and I thought that this was an important point to make in this conversation about nationalism versus globalism, World War II was not a fight between an international collaborative or an international alliance, a more globalist alliance of good democracy, liberalism, and fascist nationalists. That is a gross misrepresentation of history. It's a gross misrepresentation of World War II. And really, it's a gross misrepresentation of those three individuals. And it wasn't done by accident. It was done intentionally to provide cover for what globalist really means today. World War II was fought between two sides of globalists. Understand that. World War II was fought between two sides of globalists. The Axis powers were globalists and the Allied forces were globalists. Two different worldviews, two different ideologies, but they were globalists in their impulse, in their ambitions. Adolf Hitler was a globalist. He didn't want to stay within the boundaries of Germany. He wanted to expand the borders of Germany, and he wanted to conquer much of Europe, and he would have been happy to conquer the whole world, in my opinion. Tojo in Japan, he didn't want to stay within Japan. In fact, the longstanding feud between Japan and China, which is part of the foreign policy that America adopted after World War II, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, was because the Japanese invaded China, and they all but conquered China for a moment in time in history, and they did atrocious things to the Chinese people. And that blood feud still exists to this day, and it informs a lot of what goes on the international stage in terms of foreign relations and America's foreign policy. So Tojo was a globalist. Mussolini, he falls somewhere in between. I think Mussolini was a more radical ideologue that saw an opportunity to join forces with a group that he thought would win. But ultimately, he was fine with the spoils of a globalist ambition, of Hitler's globalist ambition and of Tojo's globalist ambition. And although he might have been one of the most ideological driven people within the three, obviously the power of the Italian war machine didn't match that of the German and Japanese war machine. So the big stick wins, and your biggest gun in the car wins, right? They're kind of driving shotgun. So he was a passenger in the Axis powers. But the Allied forces were obviously globalists, and that at the end of the World War II, they show the impulse to become a more globalist governing body in the United Nations, and using Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo to delineate nationalism from globalism in a sort of default way. And if you're nationalist at all, if there's anything nationalist about you, you're by default a Nazi, or a fanatic, or an extremist, or a radical, or a danger, or a domestic terrorist, or you pick. If you believe in nationalism, if you believe in the nation state, if you believe in a border, you're one click away from being Hitler, right? This was a hydra that was laid into the American mindset, and by way of the entire Western mindset, through our universities, through our education, but through the mainstream media as well. And there's nothing more inappropriate than that. And what I want to do for you this evening is to describe or define globalism. Let's start there. Globalism. And if you could set the time for me, the time isn't going, and wherever we are, you can look at on the episode and get me going right there so that it's right on cue. I don't want to run it, because if not, I'll run over to 2 hours, 2.5 hours in a heartbeat, especially with this topic. I'm sorry, everyone. I was just speaking with my good friend and producer here, Patrick, and we got a little show clock running so I can know how much time we're into the episode. Again, on the fly, week 1, week 2. Okay, so back to where I was. Let's define globalism. About 25 minutes in here, let's define globalism. What is globalism? Well, the Star Tribune will say it's a dog whistle for anti-Semitism. The MSNBCs of the world, Rachel Maddow, will say it's just a red meat for the base in the Republican Party, or for a MAGA movement, an emerging MAGA movement that we should consider fascist and racist because Donald Trump is fascist and racist, and mostly because he's a white man, but also because he believes in having a country and having a border. But what is globalism? How can we define it? And I've been working on a definition for you guys, and this is what I came up with. Globalism is a socioeconomic and political attack on a nation state, a nation's citizens, and the value of their citizenship by way of trade, policy, and culture. Okay, that's what globalism is. Globalism means to bastardize citizenship. Why? Because any citizenship that exists usually doesn't exist on the basis of individual power. The true basis of it is that individuals collectively have the ability to fight off or resist any tyranny that forms in the highest places of government, or monarchy, or whatever other formation of society that you have. So the granular benefit of citizenship is individual. Obviously, it has great individual benefits, but it also has great collective benefits, guardrails, a bastion of defense against tyranny and effectively globalism, conquest. And so we have a mainstream media, a mainstream establishment that wants to tell you that globalism is a net positive, that everybody benefits from a global society, everybody benefits from a global citizenship. And what they've done with global, let's be clear here. What they've done and what they did after World War II. Let me start here. What are borders? We got globalism down. Globalism is an economic, socioeconomic, and political attack on a nation state, its citizens, and the value of their citizenship through policy, trade, and culture war. Okay. But what are borders? Now, many people in our modern time like to describe borders as some man-made construct. Some man-made construct, people just drawing lines on maps. And in some ways, historically, borders have served in that way. And when we talk about borders, we can see an example where people's intent and motive come to bear on the final result of how you look at a given thing, such as borders themselves. And there was a time when certain individuals in the world used borders indiscriminately to cut up the spoils, to cut up the spoils of improper and unrighteous ambitions. But what are borders in the deepest spiritual, existential sense? This is important, right? Borders represent a boundary, a physical boundary on man's unfettered ambitions. Borders are a physical boundary that is laid in the real world to provide some type of guardrail against man's unfettered ambition to conquer, to be God, to be the ruler over everything. Right? And we've seen many societies in history rise and fall because of their inability to create consistent borders, healthy borders, and live by a culture that respects those healthy borders. And last episode, I gave you guys a little bit of a reading to go look into if you can, and it was the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, or really the decline and rise and fall of the Roman Empire. And you can look at the Roman Empire as a great example of a great society that rose and then fell because they had troubles creating consistent borders and living within those borders, within those boundaries. Usually was individual men who had ambitions that were far greater than they should be. And in that way, they were sort of heresy in themselves. Man ambition often becomes heretical. And so borders really represent a boundary, a physical boundary in the real world against man's unfettered ambition to rule all, to rule the entire world. And so what happened after World War II was that the globalists on the side of the Allied forces, let's be clear, because it wasn't globalists and nationalists, that's the story they want you to believe. World War II was fought between two groups of globalists. And on the Allied forces side, they came out victorious in that war in many ways. And they used their opposition as a framework to justify global governance. And what they did and what they continue to do is to tell you that all of these policies, all of these global policies are aimed at equality. They're aimed at human dignity or humanity, human rights. And that is the scam of all scams. And I thought it was important to start here because as we build this conversation in this podcast, we're going to keep coming back to this scam. This is the root scam. If you take religion away and Satan and some of those older metaphysical, spiritual warfares that we know go on between man's individual will and the powers that be, when it comes to politics and geopolitics and the political landscape, this is the original scam. This is the prevailing scam of today. Globalism. Globalism is intended to give you rights, give you individual rights, which will give you more individual power, more individual autonomy, so on and so forth. Couldn't be more of a lie. And I want you to understand this. And we need to recall a little bit of history for you to be able to understand this. And this is why we say that the globalists are led by the party of Davos. And we call it the party of Davos because their annual summit, their annual meeting for the World Economic Forum, which is the conglomerate of Western European business interests, happens in Davos, Switzerland. And the Swiss have a unique history in Europe. But all of these European countries have a unique history in Europe, and when you look at the structure of modern day Europe, you see a very good representation of a monarchy, a sort of rebranded monarchy that is alive and well. And so let's call a little bit of history to help proof this. At the height of World War II, when the Nazi war machine had Great Britain on the ropes, had England on the ropes, Churchill goes to Roosevelt and says, "We need help. We need you." And President Roosevelt, after much negotiation back and forth, and America kind of staying out of the war for a time, right? Keeping their powder dry until the right moment. Roosevelt eventually goes to Churchill and says, "Okay, but we need you to sign an agreement." And in that agreement, which was listed out by my good friend Professor Penn over at his channel, the Atlantic Charter, in that Atlantic Charter agreement, essentially, Roosevelt gets Churchill and the British Empire to renounce their claim or renounce their colonial empire. And this was the start of the lie. This was the start of the scam. And a few things happened here. One, there was a real effort to create the perception that the British Empire had renounced its colonial claim. But when we really look at it and think about the history, many countries that were connected to the Commonwealth still are connected to the Commonwealth today. And they still show much loyalty to the Commonwealth, not only culturally, but economically, and certainly within the scope of the United Nations and the global governing bodies that came out of World War II. And you can, no greater example of that than the United Nations Security Council, which I talked a little bit about in my last episode, and the 5 nations of the Security Council, which are the United States, France, the UK, Russia, and now China. But huge European presence there, huge European monarchy sort of presence in the United States, the United Nations Security Council. And so Churchill agrees that the British Empire is over, right? The British Empire is over. America's democracy, freedom, a land of new opportunity, the New Jerusalem is gonna lead the new world into the future. And then they have the Bretton Woods Conference that sort of sets the monetary policy for this new way of the world. And then you had the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization that would come afterward that really laid the building blocks for the global governance that's emerging now. But let's be clear about this agreement that was made. There was a moment in time, there was a friction between Great Britain, the British Empire, and America that still existed from the American Revolution, that was only in a couple hundred years in the past. And people look at a couple hundred years on paper as a really long time, but when you think of it from a generational standpoint, a couple hundred years is nothing. And when you think about foreign policy or the foreign policy of a nation or the foreign policy or attitude of a people and of a culture, a couple hundred years is nothing. The feuds from 100 years ago still exist today. That's one person's lifetime. Well, the lifespan has increased since that time to this time, but in general, there's only a couple people. Your great-grandfather could tell you a story or help raise you in a way that would carry blood feuds on from 100 years past. Easy to do. 1,000 years harder. 5,000 years a little bit harder. But we see many cultural traditions that have lived 5,000 years. The Jewish identity is one of them, or the Christian, the Christian identity for 5,000, 2,000 years, depending on where you mark it in time. So there are cultural traditions that can be carried on, certainly in the 100-year time span. And so there was still an animosity between the United States and Great Britain. And we had the benefit of what I would call a true border. I'm not talking about a piece of land, a continent where lines are or have been indiscriminately drawn to separate the spoils. I mean a true border. And there's no greater example of a true border than the oceans, than the space between nations and between land by huge bodies of water. And so we had this benefit, this natural benefit of a more natural or true border between us and Great Britain. And as such, Great Britain had to face the threat of the Nazi war machine in a way that America didn't. We were much further away. And so we had a much easier time navigating World War II and posturing or positioning ourselves as the leader of what would come out of it. And the British Empire resented that. I think Churchill resented it. I think that the Brits, the Brits and the European monarchies, the other European interests there, always held a sort of resent or animus towards America for their arrogance, their audacity to defect from the crown and the European monarchy system and create this land where the rights of the minority are protected against the impulse of globalism, of global empirical ambitions, right? Economic imperialism. And that's what the founding fathers did. That's what the founding documents lay out with all of their flaws. That is in effect what our Constitution says, that the minority have rights, inalienable rights that are protected against the momentum of tyranny, of globalism, of economic imperialism. So that animosity still existed at the end of World War II, when we got the Brits to sign over their empire and renounce this colonial claim. But yeah, and then they didn't like it, right? They had a problem with it. So what did they do? Well, what the Brits did, or what the European elitist class did, was they sent their thought leaders, their philosophers, into our universities. And they came through the Frankfurt School. They came from the schools in Vienna and many other academic institutions there in Europe. And through those institutions, they have hijacked American culture, the American identity. That was the culture war. That was the first culture war that took place after World War II that changed the American identity, changed America's foreign policy, changed America's place in the world. And that has lived on. That has lived on since. So we can start there and understand that the globalists, from the word go, had a sort of interglobalist animosity, an interglobalist jock for position that goes right back to the American Revolution and the French Revolution and the entire animosity there that happened, that took place between France, the British, and us here in America. So after that gets sorted, and the Brits were fine to renounce the throne, send their philosophers into our universities, and carry on with business as usual. And that's exactly what happened. And understand this, the globalist business model has always rested upon three specific businesses, and they still do to this day. They've been rebranded, they've been changed, they've been modified to meet the narrative. But those three businesses and the business models are the exact same. Three prevailing businesses of the globalist business model: drugs, piracy, slavery. This is the go-to business of globalism, and by way of the crown. And when you hear me say the crown in this podcast or anywhere, what I'm talking about is the European monarchy, that the prevailing European monarchy that is the head of the globalist agenda. And I'm really talking about the British Empire, or the actual literal crown there in Great Britain. But it represents the conglomerate of European interests. And we saw those European interests come together with the formation of the EU, right? And so this is how the rebranding really took place. All of the inertia, all of the academic and philosophical inertia was aimed to solve this newfound sense of liberty and freedom and the reaction to a mass amount of death in World War II, and all of the cultural and identity lines that had been drawn in such a big conflict that had such a huge you know, death toll, and made such a huge mark on history. So there was a rising sentiment about human rights, you know, democracy, liberalism, freedom. All of these things were on the rise. So it was a perfect opportunity for the globalists to adjust their business model to meet the criteria of this rising um, cultural sentiment. And that's exactly what took place. And I want you to understand what I'm saying here. The crown, and with America's help, wins the war. They relinquish they renounce their colonial rule, but send their philosophers into our universities to run cover for the rebranding of their business model, because they're still engaging in drugs, piracy, and slavery to this day. They just changed the type. They just changed the fundamentals of it, the mechanism of it. But effectively, it's still the same business model that it always was. And what our universities did was provide the runway for them to change, for them to change their model. What the universities did, starting with the Frankfurt School and that entire Marxist academia that came right into our universities and took over our universities and still has control of our universities today in America, but everywhere in the West, what they provided was a superficial metric for the health of a society that opposes tyranny, that opposes the crown's colonial impulse or the crown's colonial claim, that opposes globalism, that opposes global conquest or economic imperialism. The Marxists, the European elite academics, provided a cover for the crown by giving the people at the widest the widest range of people a story about how to measure tyranny. And the way that the globalists measure tyranny today, three distinct cultural stories: social justice, democracy, environmentalism. Those three things, social justice, democracy, and environmentalism, have become the leading tip of the spear for global citizenship and global cooperation and the globalist agenda to distract you from the business model that still undergirds the entire operation, which is drugs, slavery, and piracy. They are using social justice, democracy, and environmentalism to justify drugs, slavery, and piracy. And they are that blatant. They are that audacious. They are that arrogant because they've been successful. They've been able to do it. So we get caught up in this Marxism, Leninism, socialism, communism, liberalism, the list goes on, right? But at bottom, this is what we're dealing with. And this is what we want to try and provide you on this podcast, is a framework to see these issues in plain terms at the widest scope possible, so that all of the BS, distraction that comes in or that's put in, that's meant to send you off into a rabbit hole, you can cut straight through. The signal and the noise. The prevailing ideology of today on the world stage is globalism. It came out of World War II with the Allied powers, in which they had defeated a group of globalists on the other side and the Axis powers. And they found a way to use the identity of those on the other side, their opposition, to justify moving globalism forward in a way that they could not have dreamed of, they could not have hoped for. Because in the fallout of 75 million people being lost in a war, everybody was ready for a peace and a kumbaya, even if it was fake and it was built upon false pretenses and corrupt ambitions. That was us. That was us, the people that still exist today. All around the world, we've accepted this post-World War II democratic liberal order. We've accepted it as the solution. And from that democracy, came computer technology and now artificial intelligence, where this same group of globalists that said they fought against tyranny, that said they fought for human rights, tells you should put a chip in your arm. You should put a chip in your arm. You should go to a digital currency where every one of your transactions can be monitored and tracked by the state, by a global governance. You should stop eating meat. You should kill your dog. You should do all kinds of things for the environment. Go to an electric vehicle for the environment, for the betterment of the earth. When you see a black person and you're not black, you should look down on yourself and fall in line behind this grievance train, this train of grievance and identity politics. You should put your head down, look down upon your own culture, look down upon your own nation, your own national identity. If you're black, if you happen to be black and you believe in having a nation or having a national identity, then you're just a sellout. You should just be getting behind all the other blind sheep who want to forward their black identity as a call for grievance. And there is a real grievance, but it just so happens that those black people who line up blindly on the grievance train, at the front of the grievance train, have an agreement, a silent, unspoken agreement with those who are driving the train, that this is all meant to distract and we'll get our cut if we participate in the distraction. That's what your prevailing black leaders have done today. That's what many of your prevailing Jewish leaders have done today. They've created the social justice pillar of social justice, democracy, and environmentalism to justify globalism, to justify global governance, to bastardize your citizenship, your individual sovereignty, and your individual identity. And it was meant to really bastardize God. It was secular in its spirit. It is secular in its spirit, which is why you see an open attack on, I don't care whether you believe in God or not, and you listen to this podcast, because in my opinion, everybody's faith is an individual journey and it's tested in an individual way. And that relationship, that faith is built between you and God. And through his grace and through his glory, you can come to have a faith that is powerful and strong and fruitful. But it's not for me to judge your faith. What I am willing to do, what I am comfortable doing, is drawing a very distinct line in the sand between people who are still searching for a higher moral and ethic, who believe in God, and people who are anti-God, people who make jokes that the sky daddy is a childish affectation. I am willing to draw a line between myself and those people, for myself and for those who I lead or defend or share a community with. And I'm not saying that those people can't come into faith at some point in time. What I'm saying is that right now, where we are in a war between globalism and nationalism that has a very potent undercurrent of anti-God sentiment and spirit, lines should be drawn. Borders, boundaries. Nothing wrong with boundaries. We all have them. We all need to create them for ourselves. And as a collective, sometimes we need to create them for our communities and at the highest level, our nations. Borders, boundaries on man's unfettered ambitions and corruption. This is what the globalists have done to you, to get back to it. They have created the best justification in history for their globalist agenda. And here's why Vladimir Putin is the enemy. And whether or not Vladimir Putin is in on it behind the scenes, there's still a narrative that's being told. Let's just assume, let's just for argument's sake say that Vladimir Putin's actually in on this thing, that this entire war in the Ukraine, this entire conflict is a way for global governance of world leaders and elites to display their military capacity for the free people who they want to deter from revolution, from any form of revolution, whether that be in small communities, nations, entire continent, whatever the case may be. They want to show off you have no real power. Let's just say that's the case. There's still a narrative being told about the personality profile or archetype of Vladimir Putin. And here is why he is the enemy on paper. Because the corruption one must navigate, if they have a national identity, has a natural ceiling and a natural floor. A person without a nation, a person without a national identity, a person without those boundaries that navigates corruption is a bottomless pit. And when you have a bottomless pit, if you drop a quarter and it hits the floor eventually stops that quarter. If you drop a quarter and there is no floor, the quarter will fall infinitely. And how can one get their bearings? How can one have a sense of the world? How can one actually know themselves in an infinite fall? You can't. Now, the floor may represent mistakes. The floor may represent a bunch of flaws. The floor may represent all kinds of things that are not ideal for the quarter that hits it. I'm not saying that the floor is perfect or that the circumstance of that quarter hitting the floor are perfect, but it provides a boundary. And that's what a national identity does for people who are navigating corruption, world leaders who are navigating corruption. The globalists have no floor and they have no ceiling. The globalist impulse, the globalist ambition, the globalist agenda, it has no floor. And it means to turn you into a person, an individual that has no floor, that falls into infinite chaos. And in that way, those who have a national mindset, a nationalist mindset versus a globalist mindset, represent a navigation of corruption through order versus a navigation of corruption through chaos. The globalist impulse is chaos incarnate. The national impulse is not perfect. It's not without sin. There is none without sin, but it has an order to it. And in that order, it provides natural guardrails, natural bumpers, natural buffers to this sort of infinite chaos, this infinite darkness that becomes corruption and in some cases resent and eventually violence. That's what the globalists mean to do. That's why they want to take your identity. That's the lie that's been told. You don't have an identity. You don't need an identity. There is no identity. There is no use of an identity. All that we need is to come together under our elite governance and our set of rules and our plan for the future. You don't get a say. You don't need a say. You wouldn't know what to do with a say in your own life. You're a deplorable. And all of you who are voting Democrat out there, or vote towards this, or tilt towards this sort of democratic liberal order, you're deplorables too. They think the same of you. They're just happy not to insult you because you don't oppose them. Those that oppose them, they need to distinctly outline as opposition. This is why you'll see at bottom, if you get a person who was a traditional leftist, in some sense and believed in the stories that were told about what leftism meant to achieve, and a MAGA person, you'll see them agree about a lot of things, especially the scope of governance, big corporations who bastardize the individual and communities, and military, right? Forever wars. Now, their agreement on those issues is along different premise, right? Different ideological viewpoints, but ultimately they'll agree. But the brainwashing is so strong with the post-World War II democratic liberal order. And I keep saying the term because I want you guys to understand this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the prevailing formation of global policy that came out of World War II, and all of our mainstream media has been inundated with it. From the books you read, from the textbooks you read in public school, to the universities and higher education, to the news you get from the MSNBC and even PBS. There is a sphere of influence that can be created amongst people. We have that power. We have that ability. We've been gifted that ability to influence reality, to create reality, or to create a strong perception of reality, whatever reality may exist underneath. We have that. And that's the reality we've created. All of us need to opt in to artificial intelligence and the progression, the unfettered, no boundary progression of technology and science if we're going to survive. If we're going to survive as a species, if we're going to survive in peace, if we're going to have peace, if we're going to have a future. And in that, they want you to kill yourself. I mean, imagine the audacity of the salesman who will tell you, follow me, I want to give you peace, but in order to have it effectively, you have to kill yourself. And I'm not kidding that this is and so let me show you. I want to give you reference material, and I often hesitate to show you Wikipedia because Wikipedia, in my opinion, is one of the real Trojan horses of misinformation. The way that Wikipedia is constructed and the people who have influence over Wikipedia and the criteria they've set for information gathering on Wikipedia is just a reinforcement of the mainstream narrative. I mean, you can go right in the sources and see that what they qualify as authoritative sources is whatever the biggest mainstream media company or institution is that offers up an opinion. But I want to reference Wikipedia because sometimes they tell you exactly what they mean and they show you exactly what it is. And that is what we must come to understand about propaganda. That propaganda is not outright lies. It's lies, it's half-truth, and it's the truth taken out of context. The three of those together create the perfect storm of propaganda that keep people distracted, that keep people off of the beat, which is also why I started this podcast. We want to put you on the pulse. We want to put you on the beat. We want to separate the signal from the noise. So let me show you on Wikipedia that you can find yourself. The liberal international order. And when they say liberal international order, this is the post-World War II democratic liberal order. They just give it this name, liberal international order. And if you see here, it goes, there's a request at the top of this page. It actually says a request that this article title be changed to rules-based international order is under discussion. So they're actually discussing changing the title of this page. But I want to read this for the people who are listening. And if you're watching, please follow along. In international relations, the liberal international order describes a set of global, rule-based, structured relationships based on political liberalism, economic liberalism, and liberal internationalism since the late 1940s. More specifically, it entails international cooperation through multilateral institutions like the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and International Monetary Fund. Understand that. Understand what I've told you up until this point, and understand that there are certain things they're not hiding from you. There are certain things all of you can go and find for yourself. More specifically, the international liberal order entails international cooperation through multilateral institutions like the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and International Monetary Fund. Says it right there, printed, no problem. Now, understand a lot of the things that people on my side of the movement, the free people movement, the free people of the world, or the red-pilled folks, they don't even let on Wikipedia. They delineate those opinions as extremist, radical conspiracy theories from the outset. This, they're willing to tell you. They're saying it in plain English. This is what the liberal international order is. Okay. It is constituted. The liberal international order is constituted by human equality, freedom, rule of law, and human rights, open markets, security cooperation, promotion of liberal democracy, and monetary cooperation. The order was established in the aftermath of World War II, led in large part by yours truly, the United States. The nature of the liberal international order, or LIO, as well as its very existence, has been debated by scholars. Of course, this is the double cross and triple cross. Here's this very eloquent, detailed, and thorough explanation of what the LIO is. But the real nature of the LIO, or even its very existence, is still being debated by scholars. So the mainstream narrative still doesn't want to really say definitively that this exists. But we have a very good scope of understanding in what this thing actually represents. This has a lot of audacity in and of itself. The nature of the liberal international order, as well as its very existence, has been debated by scholars. The LIO has been credited with expanding free trade. Now they're going back to reaffirm the existence of this thing. The LIO has been credited with expanding free trade, increasing capital mobility, spreading democracy, promoting human rights, and collectively defending the West from the Soviet Union. The LIO facilitated unprecedented cooperation among the states of North America, Western Europe, and Japan. Over time, the LIO facilitated the spread of economic liberalism, which is another way of saying rebranded, crown-based economic imperialism, to the rest of the world, as well as help consolidate democracy, the post-World War II democratic liberal order. Consolidating democracy in formerly fascist or communist countries. We solved it. There was a rise and danger of fascism and communism out there. That wasn't globalism, but we solved it with this post-World War II democratic liberal order globalist agenda. Origins of the LIO have commonly been identified as the 1940s, after World War II, usually starting in 1945, with some scholars pointing to earlier agreements between the World War II era allies, such as the Atlantic Charter, which I mentioned earlier, which happened in 1941. But John Mearsheimer has dissented with this view, arguing that the LIO only arose after the end of the Cold War. Core founding members of the LIO include the states of North America, Western Europe, and Japan. And that's an interesting one that I want to come back to in a bit, but we'll stay right there. North America, Western Europe, and Japan. These states form a security community. These states, the United States of America, or the states of North America, Western Europe, and Japan, form a security community. The characteristics of the LIO have varied over time. Some scholars refer to a Cold War variation of the LIO, largely limited to the West, and a post-Cold War variation having a more widespread scope and giving international institutions more power. I mean, the audacity of it. I know when I read it, you may not understand what's being implied, but what they're saying is that the West, before the Cold War, had the post-World War II democratic liberal order was constrained to the West before the Cold War. And after the Cold War, it has a more widespread scope, and it's given international institutions more power. Okay. Now, this one line in this last paragraph, I want to read you, and then we can move on. Aspects of the LIO are challenged internally within liberal states by populism, protectionism, and nativism. Again, populism, protectionism, nativism. What did Donald Trump identify himself as? A populist. What does Steve Bannon identify as? A populist. What does Royce White identify as? A populist. This is the animosity at bottom about nationalism and populism. This is the effort from the mainstream media to demonize those of us who believe in having an individual identity, sovereignty, a country that is not bastardized by global governing institutions and bodies. This is the fight that you see playing out in the headlines of the New York Times or in the chyrons of MSNBC and CNN. This is the whole narrative. This is it. I don't know how else to tell you at home. This is what it is. If you're a populist, if you're a nationalist, you're an enemy of this world order, new world order. And if you say new world order, it's like, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, there is a new world order that they have explicitly laid out right here before us. It's not hidden. And who does the new, and I'm not pro-Russia, I'm not pro-Putin, but who does this document truly lay out as the the arch nemesis of the world order, Russia, the Cold War. I mean, it's littered all through here that Russia is the natural enemy of this movement, of this agenda. And I want to show you something else because, again, the reason I did this was to expand on what I identified about Vladimir Putin and the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, and expand so that you understand the framework as a globalism versus nationalism. And it's not to affirm Vladimir Putin as a good guy. He may be the worst guy that I could think of off the top of my head or name. But it doesn't change the fact that the narrative driven has a much deeper message than Vladimir Putin as an individual. And this is what the mainstream media does. They created an individual sort of popularity contest, icon-driven narrative, sort of media landscape, so that everybody you look at is through an individual prism. And I'm not saying there's no merit to the individual. Obviously, there's great merit to the individual. But some of these initiatives, some of these agendas have great collective impulse, have great widespread collective multinational, multilateral impulse. North America, Western Europe, Japan. Oh, I wonder who that is, right? This is what the establishment is doing to our children. Our children are growing up being told that Vladimir Putin is an evil person and that this post-World War II democratic liberal order is the only way that they can identify as pansexual safely. And there's a reason why the globalists go after identity politics. There's a reason why the Marxists and use identity politics as a bastion and cover fire for the Crown's rebranding of their business model and the globalist agenda. There's a reason. Because a person with no identity has no floor and they have no ceiling. They are prone to chaos. They are prone to distraction. They are prone to be drawn away from the things that are most pertinent and the things that are most important in front of them. They are easily led and misled. This is the truth. This is why identity has become the railhead of New World Order. People get that confused. Yeah, the elites and some of these sort of satanic economic metropolitan elites have a satanic sexual perversion to them. But that's just bonus. That's a bonus. That's their own individual lust and corruption and wickedness coming to play out on the world stage. The real mechanism is that identity as the central focus, identity politics, and this form of identity politics is intended to create a field of chaos. And that's exactly what is done, which is why people are much more focused on social justice, democracy, and environmentalism than monetary policy, than the military-industrial complex. And this group, the post-World War II democratic liberal order and all of its participants, than the business model they've been engaging in for a long time: drugs, piracy, slavery. And you'll hear me repeat these things because I want to drive some of them home. Now, I want to pull up an article right now, and Patrick, just give me a moment here because I forgot to send you this one here. But I found this, and I thought this was so interesting. There was an article written by. Actually, bring up a new tab for me if you can, and bear with us here if you're listening at home. We're still working out the kinks, and sometimes you forget to send an article you're going to need to reference. NATO-Russia relations, the facts, and the date is July 22nd, 2022. NATO-Russia relations, the facts. What's the date there? July 2020. That's it right there. Click, yeah. Okay, here we go. Now, I found this article, right? And first of all, for all of you who don't know, NATO has a website, and NATO prints articles, and they tell you things that NATO wants to tell you. Most people have never even been to this website, let alone know it exists. And at the top, you see the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Western Europe, the United States. Okay. There was an article written about this Russia-Ukraine conflict, and I just thought it was so interesting to read what they want you to believe from their own mouth. This is from the horse's mouth. Now, this isn't Wikipedia. This is straight from the horse's mouth. Since Russia began its aggressive actions against Ukraine, Russian officials have accused NATO of a series of threats and hostile actions. This webpage sets out the facts. Go ahead and scroll down a little bit more. Oh, stop here. Myths. Now they go straight to saying that, here are the myths. We're going to debunk all this right now. We're going to show you the lies that are out there right now. NATO as a threat. This is a myth. NATO as a threat. NATO as a threat at all is a myth, okay? NATO poses no threat to anybody. It's, how could it? It's a part of the post-World War II democratic liberal order initiative to bring democracy and peace to the entire world. We're not a threat. I mean, the audacity of it is awe-inspiring. NATO as a threat. Claim 1, NATO's presence in the Baltic region is dangerous. It's a myth. Claim 2, NATO missile defense threatens Russian security. Claim 3, NATO is aggressive and a threat to Russia. Claim 4, NATO enlargement threatens Russia. Promises and pledges. These are myths. Claim, NATO nuclear sharing and nuclear exercises violate the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's a smoke show there. I mean, the level of audacity in that claim and that narrative right there, that it's a myth that NATO's nuclear sharing and nuclear exercises violate the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is basically saying we'll say who can have nuclear weapons and who can't. We'll make the decision. There is no international. And remember now, Russia is in the United Nations and they're on the Security Council. So they're in one of these multilateral organizations, and this is why we call it the jump ball, because even within a clan, within a family, within an organization, within a crew, within whatever you want to call it, within a team, there's a jockeying for position. You see it in college teams between the head coach and his assistants. All the assistants are kind of jockeying for that main spot or trying to move up the ranks through their, with recruiting, the players they recruit, what they contribute in the meetings. That's a non-related sports example, but there's jockeying for position within organizations. And Russia is in the United Nations, but within the United Nations, NATO carries the biggest gun. And what NATO is saying is we'll decide who gets nukes and who doesn't. Claim number 2 of promises and pledges. NATO's enhanced forward presence violates the NATO-Russia Founding Act. That's a myth. I mean, this is a lie. These are outright lies. Let me just keep reading these. Claim 3 of promises and pledges. NATO promised Russia it would not expand after the Cold War. This is a lie. They are making the claim that the United States and NATO never promised Russia that they would not expand after the Cold War. That is a lie. Everybody who has any common sense, any sense of history, any understanding of how the founding NATO and Russia's founding act was laid out and all of the agreements that went into it, what was on paper, what wasn't on paper, knows that it was under strict and a strict understanding that NATO would not expand east of Poland. Okay. This is a lie. This is another subheading here. NATO's cooperation with Russia. This is still under myths. All of these NATO is claiming are just myths. NATO's cooperation with Russia. And you got to think, the fact that they took the time to find and address each one of these individual claims is pretty comprehensive. I mean, who's making these claims? Russia? Bloggers on the internet? I mean, where did they get Twitter? Where are these claims coming from? NATO's cooperation with Russia. Claim number 1, and the only claim. By suspending practical cooperation with Russia, NATO undermines security. Oh, this is perfect. By NATO suspending any type of peace talks or any cooperation with Russia, then NATO's security is undermined. Oh no, all you NATO countries, or the countries that border NATO, all of you countries are still secure, whether or not whether or not the peace talks or the cooperation with Russia is there. Is there. You people are safe. You people are safe. Don't worry. You can rest your head at night knowing that NATO has your back. And know when the talks break down with Russia, your security is not undermined. Wow. Tell the women and children in the Ukraine who are taking the artillery shells that NATO enlargement claim Russia has the right to demand a guarantee that Ukraine and Georgia will not join NATO. Claim number 2, NATO has bases all around the world. They're saying that this is a myth. They are saying that the claim of NATO having bases all around the world is a myth. These people think you're stupid. America doesn't have military bases all around the world. Who would even, how high do you have to, now I'm starting to get pissed off, right? How much time do we got left here? What are we at right now? What are we at right now? We're at 1:15? Okay. We're about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to wrap this episode up because I just wanted to lay this out for you. And there's some things that I missed that I wanted to get to, but we have Wednesday as well, and we'll add some of those to the Wednesday track. I'm starting to get pissed off now. And you can put me back up on the screen so I could talk right into the camera. And switch me if you can. We're just having a little producer, commentator chat right here. I'm starting to get pissed off. These are the things that brought me into politics. These sort of contradictions and lies and audacious elitist corruption from the establishment brought me into politics. It brought me to look up these things in the first place because I had to know for myself. I couldn't accept what my 10th grade teacher told me about world history and international relations. I needed to see what people were saying for myself. And I hope you have enough pride and take your life seriously enough and your citizenship seriously enough to look into these things yourself. NATO on its website is making the claim that they do not have bases all around the world, that it's a myth. Anybody who says it is a conspiracy theorist. That's why the name of this show is Please Call Me Crazy. Call me crazy. Call me crazy. I know for a fact that America has military bases all around the world. And America, as a member of the NATO alliance, represents NATO's military interests. What they're trying to say is that the American bases all around the world don't have a NATO flag on it, so it doesn't represent NATO's interests. Those are not NATO bases. Those are American bases. Who do they think they're talking to? I'll tell you who. People who they got to sign the dotted line to check the box of terms and conditions that gives away their freedom and their citizenship, gives away their freedom for security and materialism. That's who they think will believe it. And that's a lot of us. That's a lot of people. That's a big body of people out there that have made that have signed that agreement. Click terms and conditions. Click. And we even had to do it to produce this show at some spots. But we're not going to let that check stop us from telling the truth. And that's a delineation that you have to make at home. And it's not that you can resign from society, and it's not that you shouldn't fight. It's that there's an onus on you to fight in a way maybe like no other time in history. But most people just click terms and conditions. Yeah, I got you. Not interested in reading. But if they read, what it would effectively say is, you have just now given up your freedom and your citizenship for materialism and security. That's what that NATO document says. You're an idiot. You at home, you're stupid. We can tell you that the war between Russia and Ukraine has nothing to do with NATO pushing weapons or missile defense systems or nuclear sharing with countries on Russia's border. There was never an agreement between Russia and America that NATO wouldn't expand. And any inference of that is a conspiracy theory. And oh, by the way, we don't have any bases all around the world. That's all a lie. Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe your lying eyes. And I want to end you with this in the last 15 minutes. If we can, I want to show you how the shill operation really works. I want to show you that these people are amongst us. I'm not talking about black people or white men or rapists or marauders or bank robbers or Mexicans, or I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who are spooky, people who glow, people who are in on it at the highest level, and they mean to present themselves as normal, run-of-the-mill, ordinary authorities that you can trust, that you can believe in. Can you bring up Chrystia Freeland for me? I want the people to become familiar with some of these phases. We're going to start naming names. Chrystia Freeland is the Deputy Prime Minister of our northern neighbor, Canada. Now, she is one of the, I want to say she's one of the, well, certainly she's one of the leaders of the World Economic Forum. And remember now, I'm tying these together for you, and I'm going to show you how they'll tell you exactly what's going on if you can separate the signal from the noise. She's one of the leaders of the World Economic Forum, and Canada is all in on the Crown's globalist business model. They're the shining beacon on the hill of globalism. The globalists would love for America to become Canada, if you want to be honest. But for now, Davos and the globalist agenda and the European monarchs need our guns. They need our muscle. But ideologically, they would love for Canada to represent the West or North America in this globalist agenda. Now let me show you who this person is. And we can obviously we can scroll down. I want to go to her personal life. So she is, stop. I just want to, right here, education, right here is good. But scroll up a little bit. Scroll up a little bit. I just want to tell you who this woman is. Okay. Minister of Finance in Canada. She was a member of the parliament. Obviously, she was a part of the federal response to the Canadian convoy protest. Okay, this is who this woman is. Led the first ever invocation of the Emergencies Act. This was the woman who said it's an emergency that these truckers have decided to take up their citizenship into their own hands and away from us, the elites. It's an emergency. These people are radicals. These people are a danger to the overall security of Canada and its people. And oh, by the way, she has played a critical role in the Canadian response to the Russo-Ukrainian war. And I want you, this is why I take the time to go in depth like I do. Understand the type of the lexicon the establishment uses. I'm not going to bastardize you. I'm not going to act like things go over your head. The Russo-Ukrainian war, they got to give it an academic name, right? The Russo, it's Russia. But in historical terms, Russo is used to represent Russia in, the Russo-American conflict. And so Russo is Russia. She's played a critical role in Canada's response to the Russo-Ukrainian war, including the implementation of sanctions on Russia and sending aid to Ukraine after the invasion in 2022. Okay. Here, political commentators have given Freeland the informal title of Minister of Everything, an honorific previously used for powerful 20th century liberal cabinet minister C.D. Howe. Freeland was described in 2019 as one of the most influential cabinet ministers of Trudeau's premiership. Okay, let me tell you who this lady is. Let me show you how spooky this stuff gets. This gets spooky quick. Scroll down. Stop right here. Let me just show you this. Freeland was born in Peace River, Alberta on August 2nd, 1968. Her father, Donald Freeman, was a farmer and a lawyer and a member of the Liberal Party. And her Ukrainian mother, Helena Komiak, I want to say that's how you pronounce this name, was also a lawyer and ran for the New Democratic Party in Edmonton, Strathcona in the 1988 federal election. Her paternal grandmother was a Scottish war bride. Freeland's parents divorced when she was 9, though she continued to live with both of them. Freeland was an activist from a young age. Let me show you how it starts to glow. Freeland was an activist from a young age, organizing a strike in 5th grade to protest her school's exclusive enrichment classes. I don't even know what that means, but to me it sounds like the enrichment classes had some exclusivity and she wanted to make them inclusive, or maybe I'm misreading that. But anyway, she led a strike in the 5th grade against her enrichment classes at the school. That's kind of gangster, if you ask me. That's kind of cool, but understand that the politics, the political bent comes to bear as well. I mean, all of us should be a little bit more active. I'm not going to discourage that, but this lady's politics certainly aren't ones that I would agree with, although I respect that she's willing to actually stand up and do something. Okay, she attended Old Scona Academic High School in Edmonton, 2 years attending the United World College of the, oh, here we go. Here comes the Metropolitan Global Citizenship. Here's where they recruit you. Although this woman's so spooky, she might have been recruiting. That 5th grade strike might have been a test pilot for some spooky security state business to test to see if she had the stones, for lack of a better phrase, to actually become who they've made her today. For 2 years before attending the United World College of the Adriatic in Italy on a merit scholarship from the Alberta government for a project that sought to promote international peace and understanding. Oh, this was all a merit scholarship from the Alberta government. The Alberta government paid for this woman to go to school in a project that sought to promote international peace and understanding. Okay, scroll down a little bit, though. This gets good quick. She studied Russian history and literature at Harvard University. Stop. What is a Canadian Ukrainian doing studying Russian history and literature at Harvard? Why would this woman be interested in studying Russian history and literature? Out of everything she could pick, the Alberta government has sent her to international schools. She could have picked anything that she wanted. Why did she study Russian history and literature? And even more importantly, who of the authoritative media sources and whoever wrote this Wikipedia page found it important or essential to list that she has studied Russian history? Why are they doing this? They're trying to tell you that she has a firm grasp on Russia and its history, and this is why you should listen to her. This is what legitimizes her in this Russia-Ukraine war, or the entire animosity between Russia and the West in the post-World War II democratic liberal order. Okay, it gets spookier. Studied Russian history at Harvard. During 88 and 89, she was an exchange student at the University of Kyiv in Ukraine, where she studied Ukrainian, although she was already fluent in the language. Okay. Mama was Ukrainian. Mama Freeland was a Ukrainian. Okay. She goes to study Russian history at Harvard, and then she becomes an exchange student at the University of Kyiv in the Ukraine, and she studies Ukrainian now, although she already knows the language. While there, she worked with journalist Bill Keller of the New York Times. Okay, this is a college woman. She's already working with the New York Times with Bill Keller to document the Bukivnia graves, an unmarked grave site where the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, okay, the NKVD were the Soviet secret police. And we're approaching the 130-minute mark, but I'm just going to go over a little bit to finish on this thought and leave you with Freeland here, our girl Freeland, Chrystia Freeland. Because this shows you how the narrative has been built and who's working, who's pulling the levers. So you got Freeland. She goes to study Russia history at Harvard. Then she transfers to University of Kyiv in Ukraine. She's studying Ukrainian. She's fluent in the language. Now she starts working with Bill Keller of the New York Times to document these graves. And these graves are unmarked mass grave site where the NKVD, which is the Soviet secret police, disposed of tens of thousands of dissidents. Now I want you to hear this. In this article, for those that are listening and aren't watching and can't read along, in this article, they are saying they have gone beyond claim and stated it as a fact that this grave is an unmarked mass grave site where the Soviet secret police disposed of tens of thousands of dissidents. They've just said it. That's what it was. The official Soviet story held that the graves were the result of Nazi atrocities, that these graves actually were unmarked graves of the Nazis. She translated the stories of locals who had witnessed covered trucks and puddles of blood in the road that predated the Nazi invasion, adding evidence that the site was actually the result of a Stalinist repression. This wasn't the Nazis, right? This is who this woman is, Chrystia Freeland of Alberta, Canada, daughter of a Ukrainian, deputy prime minister of Trudeau, okay? A sitting member has a seat on the World Economic Forum, leading the whole deal. They're running her out there at point. These graves with these tens of thousands of people, mass grave site. This wasn't the Nazis. This was the Soviets. Okay, this is where it gets crazy spooky. While she was there at the University of Kyiv doing this work with the New York Times, while she was there, she attracted the attention of the KGB, which tagged her with the code name Frida, and Soviet newspapers who attacked her as a foreigner meddling in their internal affairs over her contacts with Ukrainian activists. The KGB surveilled Freeland and tapped her phone calls and documented the young Canadian activist delivering money, video, and audio recording equipment, and a personal computer to contacts in Ukraine. She used a diplomat at the Canadian embassy in Moscow to send material abroad in a secret diplomatic pouch, worked with foreign journalists on stories about life in the Soviet Union, and organized marches and rallies to attract attention and support from Western countries. I mean, Patrick, can you believe this? This woman is working for the security state. She is working for the NATO Security Alliance. She is working for the Five Eyes. She is working for the intelligence community. This woman is an asset, in my opinion. She's a security state asset. What they're saying is the Canadian government sent a young woman who had a Ukrainian mother who always showed an aptitude for activism, sent her to the Ukraine to study Ukrainian in Russia, and all of a sudden now she's involved with all of these diplomats and activists, and the KGB is documenting her, basically passing information back and forth about the Ukraine. Secret information through a secret diplomatic pouch. She used a diplomat at the Canadian embassy in Moscow to send material abroad in a secret diplomatic pouch, worked with the foreign journalists on stories about life in the Soviet Union, and organized marches and rallies to attract attention and support from Western countries. They've been working on this. On her return from a trip to London in March 1989, Freeland was denied re-entry to the USSR. By the time her activism with Ukraine came to an end, Freeland had become the subject of a high-level case study from the KGB on how much damage a single determined individual can inflict on the Soviet Union. A 2021 Globe and Mail article quoted the report by a former officer of the KGB, which has described Freeland as a remarkable individual, erudite, sociable, persistent, and inventive in achieving her goals. She worked as an intern for the United Press International in London in the summer of 1990. Afterwards, she completed a Master's of Studies degree in Slavonic Studies from the University of Oxford. In 1993, studied at St. Antony's College as a Rhodes Scholar. Can you go back to the top and show who this woman is for all the people who are watching? This woman is the example, okay? She is the paragon. She is the paragon of the enemy, of the globalist agenda, of the intelligence community, of the security state, of a global military industrial complex that knows it can use certain individuals to tell a story, to build a story, and then tell a story to people who are much more focused on whether or not pickles make it onto their cheeseburger on the drive home from work. These people aren't playing around. These people aren't kidding around. These people are intelligent. they're committed, they're disciplined, they're creative, they have resources, they have power. And they have power that they continue to expand and that they give more of to themselves. This woman, Chrystia Freeland, that I want to end the episode with, is the example of how a globalist agenda, a globalist mindset, a metropolitan, no identity, global impulse left World War II with a story about its opponents, its opposition, Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo, and framed them as nationalists when really they were globalists, but used them to justify globalism and instituted these global governing bodies, the World Trade Organization, United Nations, NATO, International Monetary Fund, that have come to control the entire world, and they control the narrative. And who is in their crosshairs right now in the narrative is Vladimir Putin and Russia. And really, they've been in the crosshairs since after World War II. And the Cold War started right after World War II, where we, in effect, brought a bunch of Nazis in Operation Paperclip into our government to beat the Russians in the arms race for rocket technology and rocket science. Now the Russians did the same, but the Russians have a long-standing blood feud with the Germans. So when the Russians made the Germans come in under the threat of the gun, they said, you're going to come in and you're going to complete this task, but when you are finished, you pray we don't kill you. Because at the end of the day, you're still Germans. At the end of the day, you're still Ukrainians. And we remember when Nazis marched across we remember when the Nazis marched across the Ukraine and the Ukrainians threw on the swastikas. And we remember losing 18 million soldiers to push back the Nazi war machine. And we remember that Churchill cut a deal with the United States after we lost 18 million soldiers to give up the colonial empire and rebrand the model, rebrand the Crown's business model as a mechanism of democracy and liberal order, rules-based order, social justice, democracy, environmentalism. We were there. We've been there the whole time as an independent nation, as a nation that believes in itself and its people. I'm jealous of these Russians. I don't trust them. I don't trust Vladimir Putin, but I'm jealous. These people have a serious sense of identity, and they're willing to die for it. And the globalists resent that because they have no identity. The globalists don't have an identity. Their whole modus operandi is to be identityless. They need to be identityless. They don't believe in God. They don't have a sense of home. They're metropolitan. They're around and about all around the world, wandering. They're wandering, so they need you to wander. They need you not to have a home. This woman is a prime example. And who is their greatest ally? Who is the Marxists' greatest ally? The unmarried woman with no child. Why? The unmarried woman with no child has no place to call home. She's the perfect tool of political rhetoric because all of the momentum of history that has been heavily dictated by men sways against her from a narrative standpoint. All of it sways against her. She's the perfect political tool. She's ambitious. She's erudite. She's sociable. She's creative in her ambitions and in accomplishing her goals. She's Chrystia Freeland. She's the Ukrainian. She's the daughter of a Ukrainian political activist who was recruited by the security state of the Five Eyes to go and do Russia sabotage work for the global narrative. And she's there at Harvard, and then she's at the University of Kyiv, and then she's working with the New York Times, and then the KGB is watching her swap documents and secret information with diplomats. Children, husband, I don't know, maybe. If so, her husband's probably an asset as well, because only an asset can marry another asset, right? Or that's the way it goes. But the radical feminist, the woman with no child and no husband is the greatest ally of the Marxist narrative, the Marxist rebrand of social justice, democracy, and environmentalism for the rebrand of the Crown's globalist agenda and business model. She has no home. She can wander. And when you have no home, you become very open to the idea of not having anything to fight for. It's all a matter of survival. It's the ultimate survivalist mentality. It's the ultimate radical materialist mentality. It's the ultimate mentality of individual gain. She will go anywhere and do anything at the time if she believes that it can safely move her up the ladder of power and international influence. That's what they're saying about her in the open in these articles. What'd she stand against? The truckers' convoy? Stood against any COVID misinformation. She's a leading voice on the Russia-Ukraine war. Is it just by chance that people like this are completely diametrically opposed to everything a person like me believes, or anybody who claims to be MAGA or nationalist or Christian or American? Is it just by coincidence that these people oppose us, diametrically oppose us in every way? I don't think so, right? There are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is who this woman is. And I want you all to go and look into her and become familiar with the players, with the people on the board involved in this conflict, and understand we are being pushed to a nuclear war by an organization and alliance that is willing to tell you a bold-faced lie. There are no NATO bases all around the world. That's a lie. You've got to be kidding me. Of course there are NATO bases all around the world. They have American flags on them. They're using your citizenship, your tax dollars, your sons and daughters to backstop and subsidize and underwrite the entire NATO project. They are using America, America's identity, America's ingenuity, America's military prowess, and our young people, our blood, our flesh and blood, to underwrite the entire globalist agenda. That is what's taking place. There is no conspiracy theory. It's happening. And our soldiers aren't there in the Ukraine yet, but it'll come. If we don't stop now, it'll come. Trust me. Or like Andrew Bustamante said, maybe the Americans let Putin have Ukraine in the end. Maybe this is all just a way to display, for two world superpowers to display their military capacity. And the Ukrainians, they're just casualties of war. Either way, we have a decision to make. We the people, we have a bunch of decisions to make in front of us. Again, a little bit of housekeeping in the episode. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the Please Call Me Crazy will premiere on YouTube at 9 p.m. We are doing our best to get all of the episodes and content up on Rumble for our Rumble audience, as well as we're going to try and get some things on Twitch. We're going to back up things on Free People Radio's BitChute. We are now available on all of the main podcast audio platforms, that being Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and Google, if I'm not mistaken. And you can go to freepeopleradio.com to get more information about that. And actually, we have the links right there for you to click. One easy step process to find whatever platform you listen to podcast and find this podcast there. That's where I want to end it today. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your viewership. I thank everybody out there for the new the continuously growing viewership. I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe to the channel. We are trying to create a successful podcast, a podcast that can fly on its own, that can get to altitude, and every subscription obviously helps. Every like helps, but more importantly than the likes and the subscriptions, I want you guys to comment. I don't care if you just stop in to say, hey, thanks, I appreciate the content. If you say you're a crazy lunatic for the things that you said today, I totally disagree. Or if you have some question about some specific thing that I covered, we are open to, and we need that feedback. We want to create a real dialogue and community. Also, social media will be coming shortly, clips, shorts, things of that nature. And we're going to try to start to portion these episodes by topic and chapter in episodes to come. Wednesday, we're going to do more current events, more reactions, more commentary on current events and what's happening in the news. And on Friday, we will be having our first guest, our Family and Friends Friday for Please Call Me Crazy, which I'll be announcing on the show on Wednesday. So make sure you tune in on Wednesday as well. I thank you. Thank you for the time. The fight continues. Please call me crazy. Godspeed.